Hello, and after 1,000 years, dearly, dearly beloved, welcome back to Final Girl, a show that covers everything horror from its history to its actors to remakes and special effects and anything else I want, because it's my show. I'm your host and favorite disaster, Darlington Kilbride, but mostly folks call me DK. Welcome back. It's been a minute. At the time of recording, it is September 6th. I filmed this video once already, actually. I filmed this video in February when I came back from Gallifrey 1. Actually, I have the old file. I was just going to post that, and then I realized that it's not really relevant. The world's a very different place than it was in February. And I'm going to be mentioning it in all of my immediate videos just for the sake of explaining the timeline. I had the mild form of COVID-19 and I was sick for about 2 months, give or take. And technically I'm not sick anymore, but still have lasting side effects, so doing things hasn't really been a super constructive thing for me. But I miss making content. I miss making stuff. I miss shouting into the void. So I'm back. Hopefully you are excited to see me. I have a new apartment. At some point on this channel I will do a room tour, and my room doesn't look quite as bad as it does right now. But I moved out of my hometown finally, in with my best friend, who I'm sure you'll see in some of these videos at some point, Maz. So it's been a busy 7 months. But some things never change. For instance, the most egregious of all horror tropes, which is of course what we're talking about today, which is that the black guy dies first. Okay. Before we get into this, I have some ground rules. Number one, you may have noticed that I am in fact black as a struck match. Okay, all black every day, stem to stern. And that brings me to my point. This episode, and quite frankly, this show, and I, as your host, caters to people of color. Just like in the average horror movie, if you think about it. Yes, I am reading a script, because I don't want this to take the rest of the day. I want to take this wig off my head. Just as in the average horror movie, you will survive, even if the story isn't about you directly. There are plenty of dusty alabaster scholars. You can go out there and find them and jerk off to their weak chins and Alfred Hitchcock and Quentin Tarantino. If you want to participate in that, then by all means do, but that's not what the fuck we're gonna do in my Caucasian home, okay? If at any point your feelings are hurt, and you feel the need to call me out and blow up my whole scene and fucking attempt to dox me, let me go ahead and let me preempt you with the sentiment that it is in fact hit dogs that holler. Maybe you need to figure out, just like do some soul searching, reach down deep inside, and figure out why Get Out bothers you so much, or why the idea of Black Panther qualifies for as a horror movie for you if you're Terry Gilliam, who is just on my shit list. Maybe you just need to take your ass to therapy. It doesn't matter. I literally don't care. Take that shit up with white Jesus and not with me. I'm not the one. Number two. I'm covering this one. My hand isn't framed. Number two. Understand, for this conversation to go forward, I think we have to have a common vocabulary, and I want it to be understood that there's a difference between a trope and a convention. Ralph the Movie Maker says in his review of The Bye Bye Man, which is hilarious and you should definitely go watch, that a trope is a cliche or a cheap device that's overused in films, while a convention is something that's inherent to the genre, for better or worse. For example, a trope of horror films other than the one we're talking about today is that the survivors in a slasher will be picked off one by one until the final character, typically a woman or final girl, it's almost like that's where the title of the show came from, and they'll face off against the killer. This convention is built into the infrastructure of the average horror movie and has been since Halloween, whereas killing off the character of color is a boring, played-out plot point that ultimately speaks to a lack of characters of color that are given prominent and heroic roles in horror films, rather than villains or easy kills. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, we can get started. Why horror is so effective as a genre. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 widely accepted reasons for this, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm only going to address the ones that serve my interests. So, number 1. If we go with Aristotle's definition of catharsis, the easiest explanation is that we release our violent urges and desires by watching horror movies, the killer or villain serving as a proxy for ourselves. We can also construe this as a way of releasing our fears about the real world. The villain might come back, but they ultimately do suffer before the film is over, which, if you think about it, is a pretty fucking dope metaphor for killing our personal demons. And number 2, film scholar Noel Carroll chalks it up to the basic human need to understand. In this case, why there are any monsters at all, and to explore our fascination with them. Carroll argues that that which is disgusting is also inherently fascinating, because it violates everything we know about social morphies and what we classify as taboo. I should mention that since the whole world as we know it changed, I've gone fully 1800s decadence, drenched in absinthe, painting the roses red absurdism, so sorry if this gets a little weird. Okay. So, following those 2 points, which is Aristotle's catharsis and Carroll's human need to understand, we're going to play armchair psychologist for just a second, and we're going to try and figure out the psychology of the trope. This is going to get rough for some of y'all, and some things you're not prepared to confront about the intersection of art and race and the part it plays in America's history. In which case, now would probably be a good time to go watch PewDiePie. I don't know. Fucking, I'm not your dad. Do what you want to do. Okay, so, it's hardly a secret that Black folks, and certainly other folks of color, for whom I'm not at all qualified to speak, have experienced a long history of subjugation in this country. The use of blackface to endear Irish immigrants to the white American public goes back to the black minstrel shows of the 20th century, the very early 20th century. By the way, please don't post up in my comments talking about how the Irish were slaves, but do Google Daddy Rice and Jim Crow, because I will delete that false misdirecting shit with a quickness. Just so we're all on the same page. The point here is that Jim Crow as a whole opened the door to caricaturize Black folks for the white upper crust. This, for those of y'all who think imitation is the greatest form of flattery, is the key issue with blackface. By turning an entire race and its history and culture into a bit or a costume to put on and take off when something stops being amusing or lucrative, the perpetrators reduce those they're emulating to something less than human, something bordering on imaginary, like a unicorn or the once and future Queen of Tartarus or a fucking Ewok. I don't know. Something that has no true relevance to society other than to be laughed at or used in thought experiments. So if we take both of these ideas and run with them, it's pretty easy to disassemble. Considering that segregation lasted until the 60s, and even then, the race relations haven't improved a great deal since. The long history of killing Black characters and characters of color in horror can be chalked up to either a cathartic release of deeply ingrained racist sentiment one might not even be aware that they've been indoctrinated to possess, or B, a failure to recognize characters of color as actual people. Is one worse than the other? I would say no. because we're rooted in the same soil of anti-black sentiment, and that's how you end up with this shit show, populated entirely by fools who think they're slick and or cute. I do want to go on record as saying that Sarah Silverman has since said that she regrets doing blackface, and that, you know, while her intention was just to connect, it was the wrong way to go about it, it was the offensive way to go about it, blah, blah, blah. While I appreciate that she owned up to that, because it's a very difficult thing to do. While I appreciate that, it doesn't change the fact that she did it. Those pictures exist, they're there forever, and some of that weight needs to carry. Some of that needs to weigh you down as you move forward, from whatever knowledge has made you realize that you're acting raggedy. I'm also so super duper high right now, so it's fine. Okay. That being said, I believe of the people on the screen, Sarah Silverman is the only one who has publicly gone back and renounced doing blackface. Do with that what you will. Now, this has all been entirely subjective, for lack of a more succinct explanation. So let's actually talk numbers. Let's talk data. Interestingly enough, Black or any other characters from minorities are often said to be the first ones to die within horror films. While it is not necessarily true that these characters die first, a larger percentage die at some point in the movie. And that was written by Valerie Complex of Black Girl Nerd in 2018. Same year, it was part of a survey that she did of 50 horror films that starred black characters, finding that only 10% had black characters that died first in the film. However, a great deal of those characters still died at some point in the movies. On top of their imminent death, these characters are also notably given a lack of character development, especially in comparison to their white counterparts. According to Valerie, in a breakdown of the development of black characters in horror, black characters stand a greater chance of survival if they are teamed with a white woman by the end, if the entire cast is black, as in the case of Get Out, or if the villain is a black person. However, Complex also reveals that black characters who survive the film almost certainly die if there is a sequel. Still, 50 movies isn't a great deal in the grand scheme of horror, especially now that there's an entire subscription service just to get your fix. So let's widen our sample size. I'm going to throw an infographic up, hopefully right about here. It was acquired from Reddit, more commonly known as r/horror, on Reddit, and I tried to contact the person who made this infographic so that I could interview them, and was never able to reach them. So all I could do is include the actual graphic itself. What this infographic goes over is, it's a survey of the highest grossing box office slashers from 1978 to 2014, along with multi-genre horror like Alien and Leprechaun, and they found the following. Of the films surveyed, only 5% of them killed the black male character first, compared to 59% white males and 34% white females being the first blood. Black men were 31% likely to die at some point in the movie, compared to an overall 42% chance of dying while white, 44% male and 33% female, and 25% chance of other people of color dying. This represents approximately a 170% increase in black deaths on screen since the 1980s, which comes out to just under 1 per movie. But overall, this still only makes up 4% of deaths in the genre over a 40-year time span. Pre-2000, 13% of total black male victims died in horror movies. After the year 2000, 24% died. So what do we do with the data? It's important to recognize the nuances surrounding these statistics. Representation in horror being the largest among them, because you'll notice I have no fucking statistics at all regarding the fate of black women in horror. films like Get Out and Us are so popular because, aside from just some excellent genius filmmaking on Jordan Peele's part, Jordan Peele is telling stories of blackness. From the refrain of "I got 5 on it" in the trailers, and the visual references to Thriller and the tethered costumes in Us, to longtime Black supporting actress Erica Alexander's presence. These are things we grew up with that call to us and our collective cultural understanding of the world, which is precisely why Black folks find them so terrifying. We can see ourselves in them and not just as plot devices. There are a couple of things I want to touch on here briefly because this is shaping up to be a whole series in and of itself. And I would like to tag team that with some of my favorite Black mages, which is a term which here means Black and of marginalized gender. It is for people who are, it's for non-men, for simplicity's sake. So, Black mage. You'll hear me say it a lot. Can we rock talk for a sec? Just you and me and the void. I am not fucking playing with y'all when I say this. Give me more Black heroes. This is not a polite request. This is a demand. Give me Ben in Night of the Living Dead regulating shit left and right. Give me Blade hunting down his own kind. Give me Roland Kincaid tagging that spectral ass in Dream Warriors, or Chris Washington outsmarting his girlfriend's raggedy ass family, and Rod Williams saving the fucking day in the 11th hour. Give me the stranger protecting Lena Headey's raggedy ass family after they tied him up and were gonna sell him out, and give me Ilan Newell's fine self taking out an entire building full of Nazis on his goddamn own, and Trevante Rhodes surviving for 5 years in the apocalypse, only this time, maybe, don't have him sacrifice himself for a white woman. Y'all will put us in horror when you want a villain, but even when you got a scary motherfucker like Candyman on your hands, it's still ultimately about white folks and how we're apparently obsessed with gaining y'all's love and approval, and you wonder why the fuck we started making movies for ourselves. Like I said, I can only think of a handful of Black women I've seen in horror. Jada Pinkett Smith and her bullshit death at the beginning of Scream 2. Brandy in I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Aaliyah in Queen of the Damned, and don't y'all worry, I am coming for Anne Rice. Carmen Ejogo in Alien Covenant and The Purge Anarchy, Betty Gabriel in The Purge Election Year and Get Out, Lupita Nyong'o in Us and Little Monsters. There have been others who played throwaway characters, for sure, but big name actresses that come through as triumphant heroines are slim bordering on non-existent. There aren't even enough of them to warrant a percentage. Think of how many people there are in the world. There are not enough big name Black actresses in horror to warrant a percentage reflecting their statistics. And you'll notice I missed someone pretty important, and that was directly by design. Rachel True was in The Craft, one of the most famous female-led movies of the 90s, and one that was certainly part of my own formative years. And for those of us who were little Black baby bats, having a character with thick curly hair who dealt with racist aggression and got revenge for it because she had magical goddamn powers was a huge fucking deal. It was enormous. But her presence in the horror scene after the fact was incredibly minimal. She had to take to Twitter to find out why she wasn't invited to horror conventions along with her white co-stars. My point is, we had that representation, and it was brilliant, and the character and the actress were still both treated as throwaways nobody cared about. And surprise, bitch, we cared. To wrap this up, we still care. And we shouldn't have to wait for Jordan fucking Peele to give us a chance to be the hero in order to see ourselves in horror. I'm Darlington Kilbride IV, and this has been Final Girl. If you enjoyed the piss and vinegar I had to offer you in this particular video, stay tuned for episode 3, which I haven't decided on yet. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.